Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Big Goodbye, which is episode 11 of season 1 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I will cover the episode The Big Goodbye. So The Big Goodbye is the episode where Picard is stressed out from this mission where he's meeting an insectoid species known as the Gerada, and he has to say this speech absolutely perfect, otherwise Gerada would kill them in horrific ways. So he decides that Troy suggests that he relax, that he's too stressed out, and being overly prepared and overly stressed out might just make things worse. So he goes on the holodeck and does a Dixon Hill program, which is a detective noir style program, and then he has so much fun that he invites others to go with him, Data and Dr. Crusher and a historian on the Enterprise named Wayland goes with them, and while they're there, the Harada communicate with him and demand to speak to Picard immediately. However, the Harada probe or do something to the Enterprise which causes the holodeck to malfunction, and the safeties are turned off and they're trapped in there. They can't get out. The gangsters shoot Wayland and threaten to kill them, and eventually Wesley, being the boy genius, gets the doors open, and Picard convinces the gangster to go out in the hallway, and he disappears and everyone leaves, and then Picard gives his speech perfectly to the Harada. So this is the big first for the Star Trek franchise. The trapped in the holodeck cliche episode, the first one, but certainly not the last. This is a trope I hate, and it started here with this episode. Now, in the past, I said I didn't hate this episode as much as the later episodes that did this trope, because at least they were doing it for the first time. At least it was new when they were doing it, as opposed to all the billions of other episodes that came after this that were just repeating the same trope over and over again, just with a different theme. Hey, let's do the same plot as The Big Goodbye, but instead of a detective noir, let's do a western, or instead of a western, let's do an Irish pub, or instead of an Irish pub, let's do a 30s style schlock sci-fi, or let's do James Bond, or let's do and they just repeat the same plot over and over again with a different theme, a different genre. And some people eat these up, some people just have fun and exploring these different genres. Ooh, isn't it cool, we see our Star Trek characters dress up in this specific time period and interact with the different characters, and it's fun, and they get to explore these themes. I never have fun with these episodes because I can't get past how contrived it is. And now, if there's one thing every Trapped in the Holodeck episode has in common, is it's very contrived. And a lot of people who like these episodes will be plot doesn't matter, whatever, it's just the fun. But me, I'm sorry, I can't get past the fact of how contrived it is. And they have to come up with bullshit things in order for the plot to the episode to happen, in order to make a threat. Now, I do want to make a distinction between holodeck episodes and trapped in the holodeck episodes. Sometimes holodeck episodes can be good, for example, my favorite holodeck episode is probably Ship in a Bottle from season 6. And I suppose something like Elementary Dear Data would just be a holodeck episode. Although someone gets kidnapped, it's not necessarily a trapped in a holodeck episode. What a trapped in a holodeck episode is, what I refer to when I say that, is an episode where they're literally trapped in the holodeck where the doors shut, and most importantly, another very important feature of a Trapped in Holodeck episode, the safeties malfunction and are no longer working. So this is something I can at least say for an episode like Bride of Chaotica from Voyager, which actually isn't a Trapped in the Holodeck episode, but the plot of that episode is still really contrived. But the one thing I will at least be like, well, at least they didn't do that, is that the safeties don't malfunction. I'm just so opposed to the idea of safeties malfunctioning, because it's just utterly ludicrous and utterly ridiculous. Because you go on the holodeck for recreation. I mean, later they show other uses of like training. Actually, they even mention that terrible episode Code of Honor that they use holodeck for training and other things. But mostly, overwhelmingly, it's been shown as recreation. So it's like a super advanced and much more, different experience and much more interactive, but it's compared to like playing a video game or watching a movie. As they point out with these holo novel things, it's similar to reading a novel or watching a movie. You're playing a video game in which way it's interactive, but a very, very more sort of involved experience, so very different, but along those lines. And so imagine if you were played a video game where there was a small chance, be it not a huge chance, but a small chance that the video game characters will kill you. like that just seems like if the holodecks are really this dangerous, why it's reckless of them to use this as a recreation, to allow kids to use this as a recreation. And in just a couple episodes, the holodeck will actually cause a virus that nearly wipes out the entire crew. These things seem far too dangerous to exist. And the Starfleet seems incredibly reckless for just willy-nilly throwing them around everywhere like it's no big deal, where they're basically there's like a 5% chance that will turn into a death trap. And of course, this is the fact that there are so many Trapped in the Holodeck episodes is what makes the holodeck seem even unreliable. How many times has the safeties malfunctioned? First of all, and I heard someone else mention that there actually shouldn't be holodeck safeties. In fact, we find later on in episodes like Descent that you can turn the safeties off. In fact, Picard does this in First Contact in order to make the weapons lethal to the Borg. But safeties shouldn't exist. I've heard someone else mention that, and it actually makes sense, because when I first heard the concept of safeties, I was like, it's a safeguard to make sure the holodeck doesn't kill you. But what this other person proposed, and actually makes more sense, is that the safety should be built in to the holodeck. Like, the holodeck should be incapable of hurting you or murdering you. So in other words, you should not be able to turn the safeties off, because it would be against the basic function. After all, this is a recreational device. So it should be impossible. It should be built into its design that is virtually impossible to harm you or any way. That should be part of its design. There shouldn't be safeties that you can simply turn off or that can simply malfunction. Like, that whole concept is ludicrous, that safeties. And the fact, not only are there safeties, but they seem unreliable because they malfunction all the fucking time. Now, out of universe, looking at this from a story writing perspective, the reason why the holodecks have safety and the reasons why they malfunction all the time is so they can have these holodeck episodes, so they can create tension and have stakes in these holodeck episodes. So because they want to, and this is why I talked about this when I just covered the original series, about how they, in season 2 in particular of the original series, they would travel to a planet that would just be like a certain time period in Earth. It would be like Roman, but in the 20th century, it would be like, Chicago gangsters, or it would be Nazis. And how ridiculous that was, that there were so many alien worlds that would just emulate a part of Earth's history, and how stupid that was, no matter what excuses they tried to come up, like with a piece of the action they did. Oh, the aliens were just imitating a book, which is a stupid excuse. And then there's episodes like Bread and Circuses where they didn't even bother to come up with an excuse. They were just like Romans for no fucking reason. Or like Patterns of Force, where a historian from the Federation thought it would be a great idea to introduce to make these aliens Nazis. Don't even get me started on that one. Oh my god. Anyway, so the way Future Trek, starting with Next Generation, got around this, which I agree was stupid and a ridiculous idea, and I hated all those episodes. In fact, I didn't really like season 2 of the original series because of this Parallels Earth thing, the fact that they constantly tried to emulate 20th century or earlier Earth. And so the way that newer Star Trek series got around this is the holodeck. Like, okay, so we're not going to travel to worlds that we have aliens that act just like they're in a certain time period on Earth, because that's stupid. But instead, we'll have them go on the holodeck. Which, to be fair, definitely not as bad. It's definitely better. But then the issue comes up, well, if they're going to go on the holodeck, how do we create tension? How do we have a plot? How do we have a thread of the week? And the answer inadvertently is, especially for lazy writers and bad writers, as I said, a few episodes came up with more inventive ways, but the easy fix that most of the lazy writers went to, and to be fair, this was the first episode to do it, so it wasn't as lazy, but I think still terrible, is, well, the safeties malfunction and the holodeck malfunctions, then they're trapped and they can't get out. Which, by the way, if you count the animated series as canon, which I don't think I do, but if you want to, you go right ahead. The first Trapped in the Holodeck episode is actually in the animated series, because they had the rec room, which is like a holodeck, but it was more of scenery, and it was shown in the episode The Practical Joker, where the Enterprise turned into a practical joker and it trapped Uhura, McCoy, and Sulu in the holodeck and put them in the frozen wasteland, so they almost froze to death. So again, I didn't think they had a concept of safeties, but they definitely portrayed it as, something that could kill you. So that was actually the first Trapped in the Holodeck episode, although that was just a side plot of the main plot. The main plot of this episode is the Trapped in the Holodeck. But as I said, there are future episodes that actually got more inventive. The writers decided to not be as lazy as just reverting to the holodeck malfunctions and the safeties malfunction, which is such a lazy thing to do, and they find more inventive ways, like I said, Bride of Chaotica, where they introduced the photonic aliens, which was an interesting concept, but then it became so contrived and dumb what they did with it later, which is why I think that's actually one of the most contrived episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. But a better example would be Deep Space Nine's Our Man Bashir, where if I'm not too mistaken, I think the safeties do malfunction in this episode, but that's not the main threat. Like, they're actually not trapped in the holosuites. They could actually leave. Problem is, if they leave, the senior officers might die because they were in a runabout accident and they were exploded and the patterns were saved in the buffer, and somehow their buffers were put in the holosuites because it was the only thing big enough to hold that much information. So if they shut down the holosuites, then they could lose their patterns and those people could die. So that is a very inventive way to get around it. Which is why I don't totally hate that episode. It's one of the few trapped in the holodeck episodes I like, because it's not truly as I said, they're not actually trapped in a holodeck. But then you do have a lot of episodes throughout Next Generation, Voyager. I don't know if Deep Space Nine actually had one. I think they might have avoided the trapped in the holodeck trope. Someone pointed this out to me, because I know other Holosuites episodes that had like the baseball one that they weren't trapped. That just was a stupid episode. I'm trying to think. In Armin and Bashir, I don't know if there was one where they actually were trapped, but I know Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Sorry, Next Generation and Voyager did it several times. And it's just lazy. As I said, I'm against the whole concept of it because it's ludicrous that an entertainment system would basically be a death trap. So, anyway, I looked it up and a lot of people liked this episode in season 1 because I think Will Wheaton even said that he loved this episode, and a few other people attached with the show, and a lot of reviewers and other people said that this was one of their favorites from season 1 because it was fun and they liked seeing the crew dressed up in these neo-noir. Now, to be fair, the detective noir genre is a genre I never got into. I don't know if I say I completely totally hate it, but like a lot of genres that I don't like horror, for example, it is dependent on cliches. And to be fair, this episode kind of mocks those cliches and makes fun of it because it shows our characters playing this fictional world and how cliche it is, kind of is typical of the genre, and their characters ooh, and having fun with it and mocking it. So that's actually fine. So I don't mind the detective genre, noir genre in this episode, but I don't particularly love it. I'm not willing to look past how contrived the trapped in the holodeck nonsense is because of it, which apparently a lot of people are. I don't think it's that great. And one thing I will bring up is first time I saw this episode was after I saw Clues, which was the first one that introduced me to Dixon Hill, because as I mentioned in many of my other videos, I actually saw most of season 4 before I saw any other season of TNG. Season 4 was pretty much the first season I saw, and I went back and watched season 1 and 2, and then sometime a lot later 3 was the last season that hadn't aired yet, that had already aired, because I was watching it during the 5th season. So it's the last aired season that I saw, but I did see it before season 6 and 7 aired. So yeah, if you know what I'm getting at. So a lot of the stuff that was referenced in season 4 I saw first, and then I went back and said, so for me this episode is, this is where that Dixon Hill thing came from. So it's kind of a novelty in that regard. But I heard someone say, because at the start of this episode, Picard mentions he wants to try the holodeck after the new upgrades. And this is, in fact, the first episode of Next Generation we get where we actually see interactive holodeck characters who act human. This, previous to this, we just got scenery, like in Encounter at Farpoint, or in Code of Honor, where they had Tashiar fighting a nameless, faceless ghost who didn't speak or interact at all. This This is the first time they actually had full-on, which appeared to be sentient characters. And so his line with, I want to try the holodeck after its upgrade, someone mentioned that this episode was meant to come it was meant to come after the episode 11001001. Because in that episode, the Bynars specifically upgraded the holodecks, and Riker was blown away by how interactive Minuet was and all that shit. So this was supposed to take place after the upgrade of the holodecks, but I don't know that that's true, because not only is this episode come out before 11001001 in air date, it was also before that episode in production as well. Unless they originally wrote the script for 1100 all the one whatever the Bynars episode. Unless they wrote the script for that episode first before they wrote the script. But somehow this episode not only aired first, but was also made first. So it doesn't really fit that they're referring that this is supposed to take place after that episode, because in every sense it came out before it. But that actually would make a lot more sense if it was the Bynars upgrade that turned it from just the scenery background thing to having these interactive characters. And also, as I said, I saw a lot of holodeck episodes in season 4, and probably some other seasons as well, maybe some in season 5 too, before I saw this episode. So I was already well aware of the holodeck. It's another holodeck episode, whereas this is supposed to be the first one. It was supposed to be the first time where we see how interactive and how involved the holodeck could be. And so that was part of the novelty of this episode. It's like, ooh, look, they can actually go into this other world, and they can talk to these other characters. They can have relationships. They could be hit on. They could be interrogated and live out an actual detective noir fantasy. So it was supposed to be like hey, guess what? This is a thing they can do. Isn't this cool? But since I saw other episodes first, I was like, I already knew that. So kind of the novelty of it didn't really work on me. Now, what's different about the way they use the holodeck in this episode as opposed to later episodes is that the holodeck characters actually see Picard as he appears in reality with the Starfleet uniform on. They say it looks like he's in his pajamas or whatnot, and then when Data appears, they're like, oh, what's up with him? He's like a ghost or whatever, whereas in later episodes, they make it clear that the holodeck characters have a reality filter. That even though you could be wearing a Starfleet uniform, or you could be an android or a Klingon or something, they would simply see you as true to that time period that's taken place in. Like, for example, they see Dixon Hill. They keep referring to Picard as Dixon Hill. That's who they see. But for some reason, they see his Starfleet uniform. But in future episodes, they wouldn't see him. They would just see him in a period-appropriate clothing, no matter what he was wearing. And if there was an alien like Data or Worf or whatever, they wouldn't notice that. They would just look like a normal human being if that's the time period it was set in. And I like that a lot better. I think that makes more sense. But of course, this did give them the excuse to dress up, which they do in later episodes as well. So I don't know, and again, the way Picard is like so smitten by how the holodeck is acting, that he brings it up during an official senior staff meeting, which seems like maybe not the right time to bring this up, especially when you're, just about to meet this insectoid race that could kill you in horrific ways if you don't pronounce their language perfectly. And even when he was in the holodeck, he was like, "Oh wow, this is good. Woo, this is authentic. Oh woo." That was kind of distracting. But I suppose like I'm used to, because I knew the concept of the holodeck and how it worked already. I'm used to seeing these characters be used to it. It's weird them acting like it's this new novelty thing. And again, if this episode was released after 11001001, then maybe that would make sense, because maybe they would come along with, oh, they upgraded the holodecks, never did this before, and then they upgraded it so it's a new thing. But they didn't. I don't think they did a really good job of making that clear, that this is a new thing. The holodeck never really interacted this way before. At least that never came across to me. And then there's the character of Weyland, the historian, 20th century historian. Why the Enterprise D has a 20th century historian, I couldn't really say. But to be fair, Kirk's Enterprise had one as well, MacGyver's, who ended up, marrying Khan. But yeah, let's not get into that. Maybe they could say a historian in general, but just happens to be interested in the 20th century. But why would they have a specific 20th century historian? If we're supposed to be an expert in the 20th century, he acts like a moron in the actual holodeck program. He's like, ooh, he doesn't really do much, and what he does do acts like he doesn't really know what's going on. Like the way when Leech is like Lurch, or whatever the hell his name is, Leech? I don't know. That gangster minion, when he's like holding a gun at them, he puts his gun down, he walks right in front of him unarmed and like, come on, the game's up here, give me the gun. And Leech, of course, shoots him, which of course he would. If he was an expert of the 20th century, and it's particularly, he's supposed to be an expert at Dixon Hill in particular, he should know how all the characters would behave and should know better and not act like a fucking moron. But essentially, the only reason he is there is to be a red shirt. Is to not necessarily get killed, but to get seriously injured and to be in danger of dying in order to create tension, in order to create stakes for the episode. That's his sole purpose. So that's kind of annoying. I do enjoy seeing Data dressed up in this era and really getting into the dialogue and lingo and being like, he's on ice, he's getting grilled. And although one thing I don't buy the scene where Data, where after Weyland's shot and they said they need some light, Data moves the lamp over to him and it gets unplugged and he shakes it like he has no idea why it's not working, and then Picard plugs it back in and he's like, oh, now it's working, like thinking that he did something, that his shaking, like he doesn't understand the concept of a power outlet, which I understand. During the 24th century, this concept is outdated and not something people would normally be aware of. But he's a fucking android. He's programmed with, he should be programmed with all this extensive knowledge. All he has to do is like blatantly look at something, for five seconds in order to read an entire book. And by the way, by this stage in his life, he already read all of the works of, what's-his-face, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes. So even from that, he should be aware of what a fucking light bulb is. Although I don't know if they had electricity, but maybe not that. But yeah, that might have been pre-electricity, but I don't know. But he should be aware of the concept of electricity and of plugs and outlets, just from history or from reading books or from all this extensive knowledge, because he's a fucking android. So that's there for a laugh, but I couldn't help think of, he should know what a light bulb is. And then there's like Picard and Crusher, and I forgot about this, that they really play up the romance between them in this episode. I mentioned in the Naked Now, I said how that was one of the few examples where they play off the romance between them. And I talked about how in season 1 they did it a lot, but then abandoned it later. Like, they do mention it occasionally in like episodes like Allegiance in season 3, but for the most part it becomes mostly untouched and abandoned until you get all the way up to season 7. And I'd forgotten, like, particularly in this episode, how much they play it up. Like, they play when Crusher shows up in her, sexy outfit or whatever, and Picard is like all smitten, and they play this like romantic music, and they're like really close to each other, and they're like, oh, it's so great that you look great in that. It's so great that you come. Oh, and it's great that you're here too, Data and Welling, whatever. But oh, Crusher, Beverly, it's so great to see you. I'm not complaining. It's just odd. I'm more complaining about the fact that they completely abandoned it. That's what seems very odd and out of place. How they're so smitten with each other, particularly in this episode. They're like really smitten. Even the Naked Now could be excused for the fact that they were, intoxicated. But here they're not intoxicated, and yet they're still like being very intimate and familiar with each other, and then it's just dropped like that, which is very annoying. So yeah, I guess I should mention Silas Redblock, who's played by Lawrence Tierney, which I didn't realize this. I think I saw this episode before I saw Reservoir Dogs, but it was around that same time. And eventually I did see Reservoir Dogs, and it didn't connect to like decades later that this was the same actor who played Joe from Reservoir Dogs. I know was in a lot of stuff in the 70s or 80s, and that's why Tarantino asked him to be in Reservoir Dogs, because he's obsessed with that era or whatever. So that's not what he's mainly known from, but that's what I know him from. Is playing Joe. I'm trying to think of it. Is it my way or the highway? And once I realized that that's who it is, it's so weird seeing him play this gangster in the holodeck thing. But it's cool. But another thing something I think I mentioned before is how this episode is, when the two holodeck characters walk out of the holodeck, they slowly disappear. Whereas in later episodes, like Ship in a Bottle, if something is removed from the holodeck, it instantly vanishes, like the second it leaves the holodeck. And to me, that makes more sense than this slowly disappearing thing. It seems like, again, that's kind of done for plot contrivance in order to have the villain have his, like, dying, oh, you can't do this to me, I'm Cyrus Redblock, where really he should have just disappeared the instant he stepped out of the holodeck. So that kind of annoys me. And then when Picard having that like heart to heart with that other cop buddy who's a buddy of Dixon Hill, and being like, and he's like, am I really gonna live? Am I still gonna be around? And Picard's like, I honestly don't know. Yes, you do, Picard. You know that he's not gonna be around. Stop being a fucking coward and just tell him that. But anyway, that whole scene I thought was dumb, and it was kind of, again, contrived. We're supposed to feel sorry. They just shouldn't have had that character in there, period, is what I'm saying. He didn't really serve a purpose other than to have that scene, which was dumb. And also, like, this also goes against how holodecks will be portrayed in the future, because in the future, holodeck characters are oblivious. As I said, they're oblivious to the way other characters look, but they're also oblivious to the fact that they are holodeck characters. In fact, it is made a huge deal when Moriarty finds out that he is, and is aware that he's a holodeck character and what he is. Where, to be fair, this detective guy doesn't know that specifically. He just knows that this is not a creation. But they shouldn't be able to comprehend this in any way, shape, or form, I think, if it was true to what would later come, which I think makes sense. More sense in this episode. So then I guess we're going to talk about the Harada, which are just, again, it is a plot contrivance. They're just a plot contrivance in order to create a threat. And in order to create the threat of the episode. Because the whole concept of Picard and crew getting trapped in the holodeck is because the Harada probe the ship, and all the probe goes straight to the holodeck, and we see it go, and the doors act all funky. They never explain why the Harada probed them, why the probe actually affected the holodeck specifically, and that's because the real reason is plot contrivance. That's the answer. There's no reason why they should have probed them and why the probe would have been destructive and specifically target the holodeck. Why would they do this? So they could have a plot, so the episode can happen. And it's, again, one of the huge contrivances, and the whole involvement of the Harada was just there so there could be, Picard needs to do this negotiation. We got to get him out of the holodeck so he can hurry up and negotiate or give the speech in their language. Now, first of all, fuck these aliens. If there's an alien that is going to kill you horribly, or at least be a dick to you unless you pronounce their language absolutely perfectly, then they're not worth having relations with, and fuck them. This is, again, it gets in with, and other YouTubers have talked about this before, and I totally agree with them, as it gets into the whole, that TNG, specifically early TNG, have a really fucked up concept of what diplomacy is. And their idea of diplomacy is constantly capitulating, and Code of Honor went along with this as well, and a lot of season 1 and 2, and even our later episodes of TNG do, where the idea of what diplomacy is capitulating to someone's every move in order to placate them and bowing down and doing whatever they say. That's not actually what diplomacy is. and so I think these insect aliens who are we're gonna destroy your ship and rip you apart if you don't pronounce every single word of our language perfectly. My response, or what I think Picard's response to them should be, go fuck yourself. Or maybe they could say it in their language. That would be even perfect. He'd be like, and on the screen it would say, go fuck yourself. Anyway, but as I said, the whole involvement of them was just contrivance in order to create a threat. And how come? I understand Troy says you should relax, you're overworking, but why did he happen to go in the holodeck right before they were meant to meet with the Harada? It seems like if he had a week or something like that, then, or if he had plenty of time. But it seemed like as soon as he went in, as soon as Crusher went in, he's like, it's time to leave. They barely got there, and it was already time to leave. So why not just, this is a suggestion, just a humble suggestion, why not wait till after you have this? And it seems like all it was this one, minute-long communication where Picard had to give this speech in our language going, why not wait till after that? And then go on the holodeck as a celebration? Just my humble suggestion. Not only would you have more time to go on the holodeck, but also you wouldn't risk being late for this very fucking important meeting that everything hinges on. But of course, you already know the reason why they didn't do that. So this episode could happen, so they could contrive. It's this contrivance. It is plot contrivance up the yin-yang. Pretty much all Trapped in the Holodeck episodes are. Which is why I don't like them. And yeah, like the fact that they only communicate with them to go, we were waiting for Picard. We want him to give his perfect speech. I thought they thought it was an insult to communicate outside of the language. So why are they doing that? And what about the universal translator? Wouldn't the universal translator automatically translate it perfectly into their speech? Like, even Picard spoke perfect English, shouldn't it instantly translate it so what they hear is like their language spoke perfectly? I mean, I suppose they could say, oh, we want you to turn the universal translator off and actually speak our language perfectly without using the translator. But again, why? It sounds like a dickhead move to me. And also, they didn't say that in this episode. It seems like if that was the case, they should have fucking said it. That's just me. And then, like, the scene where they communicate with Riker, and Riker is like, I know Riker's not the diplomat Picard is, but he comes off as a moron, as an amateur fucking idiot, because he communicates where he knows this species is hostile, that they're very particular and they're very touchy, and so the first thing he does is when he wants to communicate with them in order to delay and to ask for more time, the first words out of his mouth are, "We demand that you," and of course they immediately like put this high-pitched annoying sound that hurts his ears and had to shut the communication off. Of course they fucking do. What kind of moron is Riker? What a terrible diplomat. The first thing he would say if he wants to ask for a delay is, "We demand that." Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? He's not that incompetent. Anyway, I like the idea of the Harada. They were originally meant to appear, but of course they didn't, because you know why. Budget. But there was this novel, I think I mentioned this in one of my videos before, that I read when I was a teenager. It came out in the 90s, called Imbalance, where the Enterprise D crew they like revisit this planet and they beam down there, and there's like different members of the Way team get trapped in different adventures, and like the whole Parada society is like falling apart because something's affecting their insectoid hive mind or something. And it was a really good novel. In fact, just thinking about it makes me want to read that book again. And honestly, much would have rather had that as this episode than this episode itself. Now granted, the book would have been really expensive to shoot, and they couldn't do it in the first season on the budget they had, but still, I much would have rather seen that than this episode. Now, because in this episode, the Harada were just, as I said, they were plot contrivance in order to create a threat. It was very contrived, and they weren't the point of the episode. The point of the episode was Picard dressing up as a fucking detective. And you know what? And I said this about other Trapped in the Holodeck episodes too, like Fistful of Datas and a few others. If they want to have a holodeck episode when these characters dress up like a holodeck characters and pretend to be in this period, that's fine. I actually don't have an issue with that concept. The problem comes when they do these contrived threats of the week, particularly the holodeck malfunctioning, the safety's malfunction, and all the other contrivances that come with it. Just don't do a threat. Have Picard, if you want to have a flat-out character story of Picard and Beverly and Data going in the holodeck, having fun, playing out this gangster role, do that. You don't need the freaking safeties to malfunction. You don't need to have this unnecessary contrived bullshit plot about the Harada. Just have them go on the holodeck and do a character story. But no, Star Trek is, especially Voyager and Next Generation 2, to be fair, is obsessed. There always has to be a threat of a week, which I think was a faulty mindset that led to bullshit like this. I would rather they just not have a threat at all and just show them having fun in the holodeck. I would be much more okay with that than this. Because contrivances piss me off. I understand that a lot of people don't care about them. They're like, oh yeah, it's just so the episode can happen, so I'm willing to go with it. And if that you feel that way, then that's fine. Like, that's good for you, and that's fine. But for me, I can't, I'm not able to just overlook it. It annoys the hell out of me. And don't even get me started about the worst holodeck episode, which isn't a trapped in the holodeck episode, but the excuse they had for it to not be a trapped in the holodeck episode was actually more contrived and total bullshit, and is one of the most contrived episodes of the entire series. Bada bing, bada bang, of course, is what I'm talking about. That episode is easily one of the worst of the entire Star Trek franchise, and it is not at all fun! Not in the least! And neither is this episode. Well, maybe this episode's a little bit fun, but bada bing is not. Anyway, let me thank the patrons for supporting me on my channel. It is very much appreciated. It does help the channel to helps me keep going, and it's just something I truly appreciate. So we have Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Metagester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, I have a singular comment from my patrons on this episode. Comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, "The Big Goodbye, the first of many holodeck malfunction episodes. Tracy Torme was still working out the rules of the holodeck, which is why Picard isn't properly dressed. There is no perception filter, and data doesn't blend in. This is a valiant attempt, and it is obvious to me that everyone is having fun, but personally, I wanted to know who murdered Jessica Bradley and why. What the item was that Felix Leach and Cyrus Redblock were seeking so desperately. Lovingly mimicking characters from the Maltese Falcon all the while. As for the Harada plot, since when is Troy a linguist? Why doesn't Picard get Data to teach him the greeting? Chances are the superior intelligence android could do it much better than the ship's counselor. 6 Beverly Crushers trying to look sexier than a hooker out of 10. So that's a good point about the why that character was killed and the item. Now, I always thought of the item as kind of like the briefcase from Pulp Fiction. It's a generic MacGuffin, and you're not supposed to know what it is. And I'm actually okay with that. I don't mind that, especially since it's not really the point of the episode. But, to be fair, like I said, I actually would have rather they explored why that person was killed and what the item is, and gotten to more details of this particular case. And I think they should have done that rather than the contrivance of the Trapped in the Holodeck episode bullshit or the Harada plot. Ditch that shit, thread of the week bullshit, and focus more on this actual Dixon Hill story. I mean, I would have preferred that, actually. Because people are like, oh, I have fun with this Dixon Hill story, but you don't really get the story. You don't get any resolution. You don't really get it fleshed out. So, if you want to do a Dixon Hill detective noir, fucking do it then. Ditch this Trapped in the Holodeck, safety's malfunctioning bullshit, which is total bullshit. Just my humble opinion. Anyway, my rating for The Big Goodbye out of 10 is going to be a 3. Very poor. Tempted to give this a 2, to be honest, but there are some good character moments I like. I like the interactions between Crusher and Picard. I like some of the Dixon Hill like stuff, like Data in there, and some of the interactions between them. It is, as I said, a tinge fun. of the episode, but I just get so pissed off about the contrivances of Trapped in a Holodeck episodes, especially the whole concept of the safeties and that they could possibly malfunction. It is something that I'm not willing to overlook. It's something that I'm not willing to go with, because an entertainment system should not try to actively kill you. Period, point blank, end of sentence. There's zero excuses for this, and I cannot, never will be able to look past it. End of story. So, I'm being generous by giving this episode a 3. But that, yeah, as I said, there are definitely worse Trapped in the Holodeck episodes, which we'll get to. Anyway, that is it for my review of The Big Goodbye. So, let me just bring up my schedule here of what's coming up next. On my channel, I'm a bit ahead, let me find where I'm at here. Okay, so Monday will be another TNG episode review for Data Lore. Wednesday will be my retrospective review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. And then Friday we'll be back with another TNG episode review with Angel 1. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check out my channel for that. And as I cover a lot of other Star Trek videos and a lot of videos of many more shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.